presentation. So yeah, so a little bit about us. Probably, if not all of you, some of you certainly know who we are, Edge International Law Firm. We are an international law firm with over 30 years of experience in helping individuals and companies with their foreign investments in Portugal. So we're a full service law firm. And therefore, I suppose that we may well have been in a better position than some to adapt to the current circumstances and restrictions and reduction, if you like, in traditional new business. So I suppose that we do everything really from corporate and commercial to private client. You'll see on the slide there the various areas or principal areas that we cover as a law firm. I've been in Portugal for 21 years, and during that time I've seen a number of crises, nothing quite like this, I have to say, probably in my entire life, but it's certainly been an interesting journey for me, and Portugal has changed dramatically, particularly over the past 4 to 5 years. I think what was encouraging about the crisis of 2008 and recession is that I believe that Portugal was quite ingenious in a way and innovative and used flexible thinking in trying to and seeking to attract foreign investment to the country post-recession and post-bailout. And I would certainly expect and hope that a similar type of ingenuity and flexible thinking would be applied to any recovery, so that we have a more of a V-shaped recovery than a U-shaped and, God forbid, an L-shaped sort of recovery. So I'm fairly confident that certainly that measures will be introduced, and certainly we can see from the measures which are being introduced at the moment to help companies during this time of crisis are very encouraging with a view to seeing this as a short-term fix. We have constituted a special COVID-19 legal team, and it's been a combination of lawyers. My colleague Claudia Povo, who's in on this summer, who's joined us, and in fact will be assisting with any technical questions on the employment side, because that is very much her specialist area. She's head of our employment department and a partner. But we've put together lawyers with different types of specialities, particularly in company and commercial employment, tax, private client, and even constitutional matters. So what we're finding is that we're receiving a lot of requests for information and clarification from companies in particular, and guidance in relation to the new legislation which has been put in place principally to assist them with their short-term cash flow issues, for example, and also fixed costs. And this is something which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in the rest of the presentation. So Claudia, as I say, is very much at the coalface of this. And therefore, we are having to react in a very sort of flexible way as new legislation comes in, assisting clients with solutions in order to keep their businesses running. So yeah, the headlines they're international really. A few Portuguese headlines there, Time Magazine and Guardian, Metro even, and a lot from the UK. Life put on hold. Yes, we can say lockdown Britain, lockdown Portugal as well. And I think that, as I say, these are exceptional times, but times which we as lawyers, and actually running business ourselves, we have to react to and be able to adapt to the restrictions which have been placed on us for a very good reason. So how to react to a pandemic? Obviously, special circumstances demand special measures. It was interesting when Antonio Costa spoke last night. He did really focus largely on enforcement agency, if you like, for the new laws, and the state of emergency being the traditional force enforcement agency of the police, PSP and GNR. However, he didn't rule out the possibility of intervention from the army moving forward in more extreme circumstances, but it's not something which is envisaged at the moment. And I think also my feeling through both I suppose what has been said by both the Prime Minister and also by the President is that they are really trying to balance, if you like, civil liberties with a very extreme situation, together with business interests, which sometimes can be a very difficult balance to strike. So most countries have opted for isolation and enforced quarantine, like Portugal, and obviously there are several consequences for the economy and in all sectors as a result. And we'll see how different sectors, if you like, have been offered different solutions. So the economy does need to be protected. This is something which they have, which is clear. It's not only lip service which has been paid to the notion. Legislation has been implemented to this effect. There's social protection measures in sickness and parenthood, exceptional and temporary measures for protection of jobs in the context of the pandemic. The simplified layoff regime, which you've probably already heard quite a lot about. Extraordinary measures to mitigate corporate crises, and regulation of the actual application of the state of emergency itself, amongst a number of other pieces of legislation, which you can see I can enhance here. Exceptional regime for temporary, unable to justify motives for assistance for family in the context of the pandemic. We have here the establishment of, again, exceptional measures and temporary measures in response within the framework of technical inspections, periodic technical inspections. So we have all sorts of individual legislation which has been implemented here. Again, exceptional measures for the protection of the credit of families, companies, institutions, etc. So I think as a whole, it is a fairly extensive framework of legislation which has been introduced. But during this presentation, which I'll seek to focus on the most relevant measures, looking at the decree law of the 13th of March, this was the first package of measures to be introduced. And I think it is important to contextualize the way in which and the genesis of the introduction of the legislation. Exceptional and temporary measures, both in the private and public sector. Classes were suspended and schools closed, limited access to public buildings, isolation period for 14 days if symptomatic, and actually some sickness benefit in circumstances for, and also in circumstances of sickness, obviously, but also some benefit for and grandchildren. And here remote work was really sort of defined as being preferable as opposed to obligatory or mandatory. Then the 19th of March law, and again, these words, which are very common, new, exceptional, temporary, which is still quite resonant because I think it's a message, again, the government wants to transmit, that they are exceptional. So it increases the impact of the previous decree law, and it suspends most deadlines in court, including court deadlines. So we have a number in the office, a number of litigation cases on running, which this is the deadlines of which have been suspended for the time being, and also administrative, fiscal, and tax date milestones. A new tax calendar has been introduced, and also first measures to reduce to protect rental contracts, specifically the suspension of evictions. Then the 20th of March decree law really was the explanation and implementation of the state of emergency. So mandatory confinement and special protection for certain citizens, general duty of self-isolation Remote work is a new normal in the sense it is the new norm, and it's mandatory unless those functions can't be performed by way of remote work. Now, certain exceptions to that would be, I suppose, within the context of our work, where certain transactions or deals require a public deed of purchase and sale. Therefore, that's seen as something which is essential and exceptional in the circumstances. So closure of all non-essential establishments, and also wider protection to tenants and rental contracts. Then decree law of the 26th of March. Now, I don't want this all to be very technical. I have some further examples later in the presentation, whereby hopefully you'll see the real impact of this, certainly on micro businesses and on some SMEs. But this is the intention here is to protect jobs and mitigate the business crisis. So for a maximum of 3 months, employers have the right to, and this is where the package of measures have come into effect, so that the employers have more strings to their bow in order to protect their companies. So there's the ability to suspend contracts or temporarily reduce working hours. There's an option for an extraordinary training plan, so the training can be partially paid by the IEFP, but it's not cumulative with the 2/3 salary reduction, which I'll come on to in the next slide. Receive, or the employer can receive, one minimum salary per employee, and request temporary exemption from Social Security payments. Then this is a little bit more detail here on the decree law. So employees with suspended contracts will receive 2/3 of their salary. 70% will be paid by the Social Security, and the remaining 30% by the employer. The idea being to avoid dismissals at all cost, and also the company has to prove that it's been in good standing, both from a tax perspective and Social Security perspective. Then moving on to this new layoff regime, which I'm sure all of you have heard a bit about. And it can really be a solution for most companies of all shapes and sizes in all sectors. The obvious one you'll have seen here, TAP, enhanced that. But interestingly, it's not just TAP. Ryanair and EasyJet are also looking to move forward with this process of the simplified layoff. Therefore, it's just not a flag carrier national airline problem. It's actually, this is a problem for airlines all across Europe and the world, and particularly given the restrictions over Easter regarding the effective closure of the airports in the Portuguese territory. It's a challenging time for companies like TAP. But it's not just really restricted to TAP. You see here, almost 40% of companies are going to use the simplified layoff regime. They've also also been implementing this layoff regime. So here, really, it's looking to the sectors of tourism, automobile, and construction. And 2 days, 76,000 workers are already within the layoff regime. So these are really interesting statistics as to how effective it has been in implementing, or a procedure which can be effectively implemented. So the requirements are, it is a simplified procedure. Companies have to be in a proven crisis situation, and they can choose to suspend employment contracts or reduce the normal working hours. And examples of these proven crisis situations are where the company has been forced to close due to the state of emergency. There's been a declaration by a certified accountant of the total or partial cease of activity due to lack of supply, orders, or reservations, the hotel industry being an obvious one, and an abrupt fall of at least 40% in invoicing over the past 30 days compared to the previous period of 60 days of the activity. It has to be requested online, and during the application itself, and in the subsequent 60 days, there'll be no redundancies, collective or individual. Then the benefits, which are also available. There's extra financial support to maintain employment contracts, as I said, reduction in 2/3 of the salary with a minimum limit of the national minimum wage, and with 70% of this being paid by Social Security, extraordinary training support, as I mentioned previously, but as an alternative to the above reduction in the 2/3 of the salary, extraordinary financial incentives to normalise activity, and again, this has been mentioned, minimum monthly remuneration per employee will be covered, and a temporary exemption from Social Security payments. So what is, this all looks fine in theory. What is the actual impact of these measures and also the financial assistance being provided? Now, I've done it really for a very micro company. Obviously here, sales is income. They have their salaries for employees and a managing partner. They have a bank loan to facilitate monthly rent, which obviously must be a rent outside Lisbon. And then taxes and both VAT and corporate tax, and Social Security contributions, the 23.75% per employee, which in this case would be €1,496.25 per month. So what happens when there are no sales? Well, without any support, it's almost inevitable business closure unless there are tremendous reserves. And therefore, you still have the same liabilities and fixed costs without any revenue coming in. However, in the context of the measures which have been introduced, and here I'd like to remove the X. I can do that on a PPP, but not on my my iPad. But I think you get the drift, whereby in terms of the salaries for the employees are reduced by 2/3. 70% of this is paid by Social Security. There's no assistance for the managing partner, or the sócio-gerente, as we would call him in Portuguese. The bank loan would be a moratorium on that bank loan, which can be requested. The monthly rent, also the payment rent, you can use the facility of it only being due 1 month after the emergency state of emergency is over. The VAT can be fractioned, and the IRC that was due in March will be postponed to June. And as for the Social Security, these will be automatically deferred in March, April, and May when certain conditions are met. So how is this going to look in terms of that micro company? Monthly expenses pre-COVID-19, €11,096.25. And then after, with the application of the measures, €2,460. And the asterisk payments here are basically the deferred payments. The double asterisk is where there's no repayment required in these circumstances, so to the Social Security. So that's a reduction in something like 85% of these fixed costs, and therefore that's something which is quite dramatic in terms of being able to help micro companies, actually all companies, in situations, in this particular situation of COVID-19. Another example of a larger company, let's say with 25 employees, let's say in normal circumstances, they would have 25 employees. So have 30,000 to pay a month in salaries. Under the new regime, that would be reduced to 6,000 on the basis that all of the employees were subject to the simplified layoff regime. Then also there's the tax and loan deferments on the tax moratorium. Diogo covered this in quite a lot of detail in his presentation on Wednesday, so I'm not intending to really go into a huge amount of detail. You can see there in 1, 2, and 3 the postponements and deferrals by 3 months in terms of the PEC. In terms of the Modelo 22 until July, the end of July, and the first payment of kind was suspended by a month. Credit institutions, certain pros here. They're for business individuals. They're for private individuals and business. So they have a duration, and this is the moratorium on repayments. The duration of 6 months and a postponement of payment of interest and capital. And there are exceptions. These are the cons. Obviously the loan will be postponed until a later date. There are other company incentives available, so acceleration of incentive payments, assistance with repayments of reimbursable subsidies, and some expenses will be allowed which have been incurred in relation to cancelled international events. So credit lines, also really important package. Diogo also went into this in some detail, so I'll kind of just give an overview of this. 200 million being available for SME and micro companies with a maximum of 1.5 million per company, and warranty up to 80% and counter warranty of up to 100%. Then the second package, which was presented on the 18th of March, 3 billion being restaurants and similar type activities, 600 million, 270 million for small and micro companies, tourism and travel agencies, 200 million, a total of 200 million with 75 million for small and micro companies, tourist accommodation and similar enterprises, 900 million, and then textile, clothing, footwear, and extractive and manufacturing industries would be a total of 1.3 billion. So these are quite big figures, certainly for Portugal, in terms of the package being offered. I'll have to see whether we have another slide covering this, but certainly what we're also seeing in terms of the lines of credit is that the banks are being quite active in promoting this. And certainly I even spoke to someone from CGD yesterday regarding this, and they'll be in the front line, I would say, of these implementation of these lines of credit. And they are basically inundated with requests from companies. And I think probably the challenge they're facing at the moment is that a lot of it is via the electronic platform. And they also are restricted in terms of their personnel at the moment because of remote working. And so their challenge at the moment is being able, with limited staff, to take on board a new platform for the implementation of these measures. But they are being adaptive, and they are certainly being proactive in offering the type of moratoriums which are available on credit, which can be up to 6 months, and also preferential rates in terms of interest rates. Other sectors also affected: tourism, hospitality, particularly vulnerable, and also the real estate sector. But I would certainly hope with the real estate sector that many deals, rather than being cancelled, would be postponed, taking into consideration the fact that we certainly hope that this is a temporary situation. So other solutions can work. Many companies are trying to reach agreement with employees and taking unpaid leave, and these are being accepted by many employers and employees. I think that this is where you have a particularly good employer-employee relationship, and it's very much seen as temporary measures which are essential for the survival of the company. And others are reinventing production, so companies which might have traditionally produced other elements. I've been reading some very interesting stories about the adaptation of production, and they're now producing equipment, disinfectant and masks associated with COVID-19. So the kind of questions which we're being bombarded, I would say, with at the moment, I think the first is what entities can opt for layoff. This can be used by all sorts of entities, including companies of all sizes, and even establishments. So it's a group with several establishments can use only one layoff. If the contract is suspended under the new layoff regime, can the employee go to work? No, it's not an option. Only employees with reduced hours can go to work. While the layoff is in force, can the company sign termination agreements by mutual consent in normal circumstances? Yes, because these are not covered by the prohibited dismissals. Another one which we're asked is it possible to terminate a fixed term contract or simply not renew it? Yes, because it's not covered by the prohibited dismissals. And it's also true for any infraction that can lead to disciplinary action either before or during the layoff regime. Can the company that introduced layoff conduct disciplinary action while the measure is in place? Yes, for any company employee, including those who are subject to layoff regime. And can the company, a company force employees to take holidays? No, they can't. It has to be agreed by both parties. Another one is if a company is covered by Social Security protection at home, can they also be covered by layoff? No, because these measures are not cumulative, and therefore the employer-employee has to choose one. And so what are the principal differences between the Social Security protection and layoff? Social Security protection is available to all companies. Layoff is only available to those who have a reduced activity of 40%, or those who have ceased activity during the state of emergency or due to the state of emergency. And how does one define this 40% activity, and how do you prove it? It's all very well being able to say that you've reduced your activity by 40% or sales, but there has to be a requirement that the company document issues an official document of this nature saying there has been a reduction over the past 30 days as compared with the previous 60 days. So on top of our COVID-19 legal team, we are seeking to provide as many of our legal services as possible. So this is in reaction, obviously, to the type of inquiries which we're receiving from companies and individuals. But also we have to work within the parameters of remote working and providing only services which can be performed within an office, within that office and not at home. So, but we do continue to operate our property services and notarial services. Residency by investment obviously has certain suspensions at the moment. Non-habitual tax residency service we will continue to run within the parameters and restrictions of very much reduced public service. Corporate and commercial services as well, including support and company incorporation. Believe it or not, we are being asked by clients to incorporate companies even during this time, and also actually make their non-habitual residency tax applications. And so things such as obtaining Portuguese tax numbers, litigation services tend to be more pre-litigation. Employment services obviously a very active sector, as Claudia will testify to. Probate and will services, this is a time, again, believe it or not, where people do think of their succession planning and some of the more mundane ancillary services which we operate. Our contacts, that's my contact. I'm very much a kind of conduit, if you like, to the team, to the various teams within Edge and to the COVID-19 legal team. But certainly you can use me as a postbox, if you like, so that I can disperse any inquiries which you or anyone you know may have to the respective individual within the team. And yeah, despite remote working, we're still operating our offices. So in the sense that we have personnel remote working, in Porto, in Lisbon, in the two offices, or I should say outside the two offices in the Algarve. We have a small representative office in London too, and also in Cape Verde. So, folks, that's it. In terms of the presentation, I tried to squeeze quite a lot of information into one presentation there, but I hope it's been useful. And I think now that myself and Claudia would be very much willing to take any questions which you may have specifically on the presentation. So thanks for your attention, and also thanks to the IPBN for putting these webinars together. I think that it's been a good way for us as a community to keep in touch. Okay, over to you.
Okay.
Hi, Geoffrey. Oh, sorry, you're already
Hi.
speaking, Jared. I'll go on mute.
Oh, Carol, did you want to ask a question? Okay.
Yes, hi. I thought somebody else was asking, so I paused for a moment. Hi, Geoffrey. Thank you very much for the presentation. That was excellent. Hi,
No.
Claudia.
Hi, good morning.
You have emailed me before. Thanks.
Yes.
I failed to join the webinar yesterday. I think it was. I couldn't get the sound working, but I'm here today, and thank you very much for that. I suppose the question I have. The company that I work with are called Global Shares, and we're based globally in 15 different jurisdictions, and we have an office in Lisbon with 40 plus employees. I don't think that layoff is something that will be appropriate to us, because we don't intend to lay off any of our staff, but what we're looking for is some kind of a subsidy. Like in Ireland, they have what's called a wage subsidy now, which we can apply for, which encourages retaining the employment of your staff while you're going through this drop. Our branch in Lisbon really is a tech hub for us, so it's development, IT development, and we also have a service desk there. And I'm just wondering what area would be best place for us to apply for some kind of assistance. So our Portuguese entity doesn't invoice, it's a service area for our business really. And would that have an implication?
If I can, hi, maybe I can try to give you some ideas. I don't know, in fact, if all the staff that you have in Lisbon is now required to work all the time, or as used to be in the past or before this situation, because you could apply a sort of layoff, which is not suspension of contracts, but in fact a reduction of hours, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
to your business.
I don't think that's our intention right now.
No,
because it's our software development team mostly that are there, and we obviously our business is not going to fail because of this, but we're certainly going to see a massive drop in revenue, and we're a large business, but we would like to avail of any subsidies that we can to help us retain our staff on a full-time basis.
in that case, for aids to salaries, what the government has approved is in fact this layoff regime. That's the main area where you have both the Social Security exemption associated to aids to pay salaries. If you don't fit in that specific situation of layoff, then what you can use is the moratorium regimes and the credit lines that the government has approved and that Geoffrey has pointed, and other sorts of measures, but not really directly connected to salaries.
So, thanks, Claudia. So it would seem that unless we want, or we're in a position to lay off our staff, that we can't benefit from any kind of a subsidy to pay our...
Not connected to employment contracts.
Okay.
What you could have, if the staff fits in one of those situations, is have them having Social Security protection, but for that they would have to have children under the age of 12 not going to school, or other situations related to health.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for your help.
No problem.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, those measures, extraordinary measures, I think you said at the beginning, are in place for a period of 3 months.
Yes.
What happens if the situation goes longer? Will they be renewed or extended, or how will that work?
Hard to predict, Arnold. I think that there could be a potential for the extension, depending upon the circumstances. As I said at the beginning, this is a really very organic area of law right at the moment, and therefore it has to be reactive to the situation as it evolves, and the COVID-19 situation as it peaks. Which is likely to be only in May. Therefore, there may well be an extension of the regime, but there would have to be a new specific piece of legislation which would be implemented in that respect. And I think that the government has been very conscious about balancing the restrictions which were required to implement, together with the protection of companies and the protection of jobs as well, and therefore that's something which would have to be, fairly finely tuned. I don't know, Claudia, whether you have any kind of view on that.
I think that what we have at the moment is a sort of limitation in the sense that the legislation has a maximum of 3 months to apply, for example, on the layoff regime. But to me, it seems that this was the way the government had to confine or to sort of give also limitation to what's going to happen, because many companies will apply. What will happen if the situation extends? I think the government will have also to apply extension to the legislation, in case this is not enough to cover all that's going to happen. But this is very uncertain at the moment. So I believe that was why they gave 3 months as a limit.
Yeah, and I also think that there are certain economic factors at play, which are, this has been quite exceptional in the sense that, have we ever had a crisis like this, whereby it has been caused in effect by the consumer being taken out of the economy? And I think they'd be very conscious of the fact of these reductions which are being made, and also, this significant financial spending power of the consumer in the context of the overall economy. So that balancing act also has to be juggled as well. So I think that it was, particularly in a regime whereby, it is a very strict framework, employment framework. These are pretty exceptional. I think Claudia would agree, of measures which are being introduced, particularly by government, such as PS, and with its particular political, unofficial, shall we say, coalition. Therefore, I think they'd have to look very carefully at further extensions in that more global context.
That's true, because in fact it will affect employees' salaries as well, those who will be under the measure, because they will get only 2/3 of their salary. So this will have a big impact on their income as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's interesting if you look at China, and they've started to reopen some of the affected areas. But what the businesses there are finding is that they've opened up their businesses, but their employees, because of the restrictions in other areas, can't reach their place of employment. And also there is a whole issue around the supply chain, and I think there's no doubt that Europe is going to experience the same thing. We've all been impacted by the virus at different stages. We're all a couple of weeks behind each other. And that also means that the reopening of businesses and the reopening of supply chains is going to be staggered as well. So I think the government are just focusing on the here and now in terms of let's just deal with what we can right now. but there's no doubt that they will have to introduce other measures even when the virus has passed, because the recovery and getting back to business phase will definitely be staggered.
Yes.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that one of the things which Diogo mentioned in his presentation, which was, you were there as well, Sharon, it was an excellent presentation, is the restrictions that the Portuguese government has because of the level of debt. And I think that therefore there are certain restrictions in terms of, I suppose, what they would consider to be promoting the reactivity of the economy. But again, I think that governments have shown, or Portugal has shown in the past, that it can be quite lateral thinking in this respect. And I would certainly hope that, in the same way that I believe a lot of effective measures have been introduced with a view to maintaining companies' operations and maintaining, if you like, people's jobs even with a reduced salary. I would certainly hope that the same level of previous proactive and flexible thinking would be used in order to attract investment once again into the country. Because let's face it, Diogo also mentioned the statistic of the huge contribution that the tourism sector makes to the Portuguese economy. But let's not forget also some of the manufacturing, particularly some of the bespoke manufacturing, in the north of the country. So, I think all of these industries need to be incentivized as well to come out so that they're in a position to hit the ground running when the worst has passed.
Yes.
So I don't know if there are any other questions or comments.
No.
If not, we have, as I say, the presentation is going to be made available, in the normal way. What I'm hoping to have live fairly soon is a microsite regarding our COVID-19 legal team, which I can share with the network as required, so that sort of direct questions can be put through that platform. Also very happy to take questions, by email. So that we can, and those will be redirected, either I can answer myself or to one of the COVID-19 team. So,